Yep, so I think we're live now.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's now 2 minutes past 6 p.m. and I would like to start the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. The Task Force purpose is to discuss and make recommendations into relation to the environmental, economic and social aspects of the Lower Thames Crossing. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and live streamed to the Council's website. And I'd also like to remind members and officers and guests to mute their microphones when not speaking. Apologies for absence. I have received apologies for absence from Mr. Peter Ward and Anna Eastgate. Lucy, do you have any other apologies for absence?
No, no other apologies tonight.
Thank you. Moving on to the minutes. I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 18th of January 2021 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes?
Approved.
Sorry,
Thank you,
Chairman.
Councillor Jeffries.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I did actually send my apologies. If that could be recorded, thank you.
Lucy, if you could note that, please. And those minutes are approved. Move on to item agenda 3, urgent items of business. I've agreed to one item of urgent business this evening, which is to receive a presentation from Highways England. This is a Lower Thames Crossing Task Force update regarding landscape design, green infrastructure, and walkers, cyclists, and horse riders. I'd like to hand over now to Claire Donnelly from Highways England to introduce any Highways England officers that are in attendance and to present your presentation to Task Force.
Hi. Yeah, hello again. At the end of the last task force, I did say that we would provide additional briefings for walker, cyclists, equestrians, green infrastructure and landscape design, and that's the plan today. So from Highways England, we have Gary Hodge, who you know, and Steve Roberts. We also have Palomi Basu, Phil Stainer. Anyone else I've missed? Oh, I'm going to bring on. Let me put my presentation.
There's Ben and Andrew too.
Yes, I know, but I was going to give them a special mention.
Right.
As well. So as I say, I'm going to present landscape design, green infrastructure, and walkers, cyclists, and horse riders. But I'm going to do this for speed. I'm going to present everything, and then hopefully we'll have some questions at the end. And then Ben, who oversaw the work for walkers, cyclists, and equestrians, and horse riders, and Andrew Kay, who's our landscape architect, will be available to answer any sort of detailed questions that you might have on the proposals.
Sounds absolutely fine. Sorry, Claire, to interrupt you. So if members could just make a note of their questions and ask them at the end, that'd be fantastic. It's quite a lot for Highways England to deliver to us this evening. Sorry,
yes.
Claire, back over to you.
Yes, that would be great. There are a lot of slides, but hopefully it's quite a broad presentation and I'll be able to get through it at a good lick. First of all, I'm just going to talk about some of the project-wide principles we have around biodiversity and landscape design. Then I'm going to talk about how we combine lots of different elements into an integrated landscape proposal. And finally, I'm just going to talk through 3 areas in Thurrock, which we call the Ockenden Link, the A13 junction, and the Chadwell Link. I'm not going to do the Tilbury and the Mardyke areas again, because we spoke about those a little bit. But if you do have any detailed questions about those areas, we can address those again at the end. So going through the proposals, I do appreciate, I'm going to be presenting the proposals as they were in the last application. So I know that Thurrock would like to see more legacy measures, and I know that they're being discussed with officers, and I think Steve Plum might want to just talk a little bit about that as we go through as well. But these were the proposals as they appeared in the last DCO application. So obviously LTC is a very large project. It covers over 2,300 hectares across north and south, and that includes a number of designated and irreplaceable habitats. So in the north of the alignment, that includes, for example, Rainbow Shore woodland, which is on the Chadwell Link, but also areas which sometimes appear to be less less exciting, I guess, visually. So we're also losing Low Street Pit, which is a local wildlife site, but which has fantastic provision and habitat for invertebrates in the north. And that's a common pattern. A lot of the time, the mitigation that we're looking to provide throughout Thurrock is for insects and invertebrates. I'm going to go and move on. Okay. The habitats that we are impacting on across the project are generally arable fields, which don't have a very high biodiversity and species poor grassland. And we can have a number of different impacts on the land that we're affecting. It can be direct habitat loss, habitat degradation through air quality effects. It could be noise and visual disturbance, or it could be habitat fragmentation. And obviously as well, we have some designated sites and adverse impacts through those different mechanisms that we will affect. We are though providing what we want to do is make sure that whatever we put back is better than what we lose. So we'll be providing less arable land and be putting in more diverse grassland and woodland. So that includes open mosaic habitats and species-rich grassland. And another key component of what it is that we want to put back is we want to strengthen the links between existing and new green infrastructure. So DEFRA guidance, for example, on providing green infrastructure means that we need to provide more resilience by linking these areas up so that in times of stress, essentially flora and fauna can move between different areas of habitat. And therefore, a lot of what we've been doing is about forging green corridors that enable different areas of habitat to be linked up across the project. We also have a number of designated species that need specific habitat to be redesigned for them, and that's called offsetting. So in Thurrock and north of the river, we're mainly looking at badgers, bats, great crested newts in the sort of Blackshots area, and water voles. So we're providing about 155 hectares of species-specific mitigation across the project, which is generally predominantly open mosaic habitat for great crested newts, reptiles and invertebrates. And of that 155 hectares, 100 of those hectares is actually in Thurrock. Overall, on the scheme, we do see improvements in the amount of habitat that we are providing. So we're providing twice as much woodland as that is created as lost, and over 400 hectares of arable land is being converted into semi-natural habitats. Hedgerow is a really important part of our strategy as well, because it greatly improves biodiversity and actually can increase agricultural yields. And we're providing, once again, twice as much hedgerow as is being lost by the project. As well as there are a number of different habitats as well, such as ponds and ditches, which are good for water vole habitat. So overall, on non-designated habitats, we're seeing an increase in biodiversity value about 15% over the baseline. And then finally, just a slide on our legacy. We have recently set up a benefit steering group, and that includes Thurrock and other local authorities and stakeholders. And what we're doing is trying to develop and deliver projects in the region that will provide habitat enhancements across natural character areas. So LTC has appointed a team to engage with stakeholders and develop the funding applications for those projects. So, for example, with Essex Wildlife Trust, we have about £250,000 worth of embedded mitigation in there for mink control across Essex, which helps our water vole mitigation. And then in addition, we're assisting them to apply to High Raise England for an additional £200,000 worth of funding to have wider benefits out across the county and support their Water Life Recovery East project. So that's something that's actively going on at the moment, and we're expecting to bid for about £1 million of delivery funding in this financial year. Now, being a bit more specific about Thurrock, then I had some questions last time about the tree planting that we were putting in. So secured through the design principles, there are we've developed a number of north-specific planting palettes, and we're committing to those through the design principles. Therefore, there'll be a requirement of the DCO. Generally, they're for native broadleaf woodland. This one that I've put up here is the woodland planting mix. It includes species like alder, beech and hornbeam, and it also includes things that we call nurse species, which are effectively faster growing trees, which will provide more screening effect quickly, while the slower growing trees like the oak come through and provide the ultimate habitat overall. The final density, so these are pallets, so they're a selection of different trees, but the final mix, so the quantities of each type of tree and the density at which they're planted, will be decided at detailed design, and generally that's so that we can modify the mix to respond to ground conditions and the local provenance and the local stock, so that they can be sort of just fine-tuned and tailored to each of their locations. Also, an important thing to know about woodland planting in Thurrock is that we will also be doing soil salvage for ancient woodland. So that's where we literally take the soil from the woodland floor at Rainbow Shore, and then we will transplant it to the new areas of planting. And the benefit of that is that it takes some of the seed bank and the sort of the critters in that soil, and hopefully helps to establish in parallel with new tree planting there, the ecosystem more quickly. As I said, the densities of trees that we're going to be providing will vary, but if you look at the number of hectares that we're providing in north of the river and offset, that will look to be up to 385,000 trees to be planted north of the river in the various different planting areas we're going through. But that's with the densest, it could come down from that number. In terms of just some principles as well, which we know are not immediately accessible with the plans that we provide in regards to the principles of landscape integration. So I know Gary has previously talked to you about these. So this is the principle of false cut. And a false cut is a bund that runs both sides of the road, and it provides a visual screen of the road. So if you're stood here outside, you cannot see the road, and it provides an immediate visual screen, an acoustic barrier from the traffic of the road through there. They're provided extensively across the project, which I will show you as we go through some of the different landscape areas, and they can be provided when the road is in actual cutting as well. So when your road is already below the existing surface, you can provide maybe a smaller false cut just to make sure that it's providing the screening effect, and they can also be provided when the road is on embankment. When the road is in deep cutting, we tend not to provide false cuttings because obviously the road is shielded by the existing levels, and there's no need to do that. This is a sort of very clear but very engineering based diagram, and so layered on top of this is a whole series of principles about how these structures are integrated into the landscape. So first of all, we make sure that they're not square. like this because they would stand out like a sore thumb. We make sure that they're rounded off. We try to not put fences along the top of them because all that does is draw your attention and draw your eye to the fact that there's a linear feature cutting across the landscape. So what we do is we try to put fences and access controls at the base of the slope. Also, depending on where we are in the project and what the geology is and the type of planting, we would slacken the slope. So we wouldn't necessarily have them this steep, so we would slacken them, and that allows us to plant more where it's appropriate to the local landscape character on there, and that helps disguise these earthworks and ultimately the alignment of the road as well. But there are some places where we can't provide false cuts because of the volume that they take. So for example, in the Mardyke area, we can't provide false cuts because they take volume of flood storage out. Obviously, they take an awful lot of space in plan. So where we can't provide false cuttings, we tend to use tree planting and acoustic fences. And then ultimately, as we discussed in the Mardyke, we just make sure that whatever you're looking at is as attractive as possible. On those slackened slopes, it is possible to provide much more biodiverse habitat, so more meadowland or species-rich grassland, which is a picture at the top. As I was saying, we don't generally want to draw attention to the fact that there's a linear feature, so the road going through the landscape. So the other thing we do is we tend to break it up by following the existing topography, so that for here, trees are sort of scattered along the existing topography, and that then breaks up the eye line and means that the road doesn't look quite as prominent in the landscape. And then another aspect that we obviously want to look at is the integration of just how all the edges of this work. So we work quite hard to make sure that we integrate boundary fencing and hedgerows, for example, and that our drainage ditches and everything are easy to maintain. We have the correct slopes for woodland planting where we need it. Okay, so that's some of the principles that have informed landscape across the project. In terms of elements and factors that have influenced the design of the landscape, there are quite a few that are not always immediately understandable when you look at areas of planting. And so these are effectively the main factors which we've considered when we've been developing the integrated landscape design. So first of all, there is, of course, the engineering requirements. So the engineers will come to us and they will give us the alignment of the road, the height of the road relative to the landscape. They will look at where we have constraints around utilities and third-party infrastructure. And then there are specific features associated with the road that need to be integrated into the landscape design. And a good example of that is attenuation ponds, which sit near the alignment up and down the entire scheme. And also access roads, which, where possible, for example, we've incorporated into Nmu Routes so that we can make dual use of them. Environmental mitigation, we're obviously obliged by the environmental assessment process to provide mitigation across the project. So that can include specific things like providing bat boxes, bird boxes, particular types of habitat, but as well as noise and visual mitigation. And that all needs to be thrown into the mix and then designed to be suitable to its landscape, which brings me to the third factor, which is the existing landscape character. It's not always appropriate to use the same strategies across the project. So we have got a very diverse range of different landscape characters from north to south, and what is appropriate at Thames Chase Woodland is not necessarily appropriate in the Mardyke Fenland. So we had to tailor each of those approaches to mitigation to be appropriate to their local landscape. We also took into account the results of the green infrastructure study, which looked to map existing green infrastructure projects and proposed projects along the alignment and in the broader area. And finally, we took into account the needs of walkers, cyclists and horse riders, mapping the routes which we wanted mapping the routes and then identifying new routes that people might want to use. So just in a little bit more detail, we commissioned the green infrastructure study, and the idea was, as I say, to understand the existing green infrastructure that exists, so existing 100 parks, assets of cultural heritage, for example, different pedestrian rights of way across the scheme alignment. And then we also spoke to about 16 different groups, as well as local authorities and statutory stakeholders, about different projects and priorities that they wanted to bring forward in the area. So we mapped and then we identified the green infrastructure sort of constraints and opportunities, and then we incorporated some of those proposals into the scheme. Now there is some more work that we're going to be doing. We've currently incorporated green infrastructure schemes that were directly impacted by the Lower Thames Crossing alignment, but I think, Steve, you wanted to mention something about more work being done on this?
Yes, just briefly, as you say, local authorities were sort of consulted when this document was produced in about 2018 that the main work was carried out. That basically consisted of finding out what existing policies were and some of the projects. The stakeholder work was almost exclusively with wildlife groups of various organisations such as RSPB, the Essex Wildlife Trust and Kent Trust, because obviously it sort of included the whole area. The main issue that we've got with it is that it's very ecologically led. Now, green infrastructure is a much wider idea, and especially for somewhere like Thurrock, where we've got issues with public health, active recreation, flood management. We need to make sure that the green infrastructure study has a much more rounded, basically more up-to-date view of what green infrastructure should be, and that's something we're working on at the moment.
Okay. Then the next study which influenced the design was our investigations into the needs of walkers, cyclists and horse riders. So there's a standard process that Highways England uses, we call the WCHAR, but it's the walkers, cyclists, horse rider assessment and review process. And what they do is they look at the context for non-motorised users within the areas that will be affected by the project. And it's quite a big, wordy and weighty document that looks at local policies and objectives. So, for example, we looked at Thurrock's action plan, where they said that more high quality off-road routes were wanted to encourage active travel in the borough. And then also we look at census data. So I've included some maps here which look at people's capability to walk and cycle. So using health data as well as topography, the tool will actually tell you how capable people are of walking and cycling different distances. So this is people's capability to walk in Thurrock, and you can see particularly around the sort of East Tilbury, we've got some really dark green areas where you've got a relatively young population who are very, very capable of walking 3.1 kilometres easily, which is quite different actually. So north of the borough, those distances, north of the borough, those distances get quite a lot smaller, and if you look south of the river, they're an even smaller, and that difference is also highlighted in the capability to cycle. So here, once again, we've got some good dark green circles in and around south of the borough. It does sort of break down a little bit to the north, which means that people are capable of cycling between 11 and 12 kilometres to the south of the borough, which is a distance, is actually quite far. And if you're in East Tilbury, it covers a huge amount of the borough and gives you an enormous amount of access to both the work and services opportunities you get in the more urban areas, but also the recreational opportunities that you could have to the north of the borough. So and that's quite important because the attractors for cycle trips were all very much focused down south of the borough. So broadly, our strategy for NMUs, for walkers, cyclists and horse riders, I'm sorry, there's the acronym game that we play with this one, is that south of the borough, we're looking at shorter distances between urban centres, which means that we can that cycling is a viable alternative to using a car for commuting to work and getting access to the services that you want. But north of the A13 into urban distances are much bigger, and therefore proposals focus north of the A13 mainly to giving people access to the countryside and the country parks more for a leisure activity. So this document assessed about 60 different opportunities, which we tested over a series of months. We looked at different opportunities and the feasibility of providing each of these routes, and we came up with a short list. In Thurrock, the proposals for walkers, cyclists and equestrians are captured in the DCO through the general arrangement drawings, and that captures the line generally of where the route for walkers, cyclists and equestrians will go. But there is much further detail to be provided at the detailed design stage. So for example, making sure you have the appropriate type of surfacing. So for off-road but parallel to road routes, you would have a more formal surfacing than some of the countryside routes. We also spoke last time a little bit about access controls to deter antisocial behaviour. These are details which we would work out in detailed design, but I put up some examples of different style configurations which are suitable for equestrians and wheelchair users, but are less able to be accessed by quad bikes. So there are a number of different details, as I say, that we need to work through. And then just in numbers, in total, we're providing about 22 kilometres of new or upgraded routes in Thurrock. A lot of that is us providing upgrading footpaths to bridleways so that they can be used by cyclists and equestrians as well. But also there are some of those key commuter routes where we're providing roadside tracks, so nearly 9 kilometres of additional roadside tracks. But a lot of the value in the NMU work is in sort of providing a more coherent network of routes for walkers, cyclists and equestrians. And finally, there are key documents related to landscape character, so the ES and the design narrative, where we would look at the whole of the route, and we divided it into different character areas. So each of these different coloured areas is a different landscape character. And that allowed us then to tailor the approach to the mitigation and the landscape design to that landscape character. So I'm going to give you an example of that now, which we're going to look in this area, which is in Ockenden farmland. It sits just between North Ockenden and South Ockenden through here, and the Mardyke Viaduct is just there. So we're going to just look a little bit more about how those factors have influenced the design for the Ockenden link. Okay, so this is the landscape character in the area. So if I just give you a bit of orientation, so there's South Ockenden, North Ockenden, and we've got the M25 running, there we go, north-south across the page, so the river and the Dartford crossing is that way, and there is also the railway line, which is a little bit harder to make out, running down through here. So it's a gently rolling landscape. It's mainly rectilinear fields, but then with woodland blocks like this is the wilderness here, at the edges of fields with hedgerows in between them. And there are a few not so obvious in this picture, water bodies from old sand and gravel quarries running through there as well. This is the landfill site. In the foreground, you can see as well, it's the raised platform there prior to landscape restoration. So in terms of environmental mitigation, we would then map This is a survey of bat roosts in the area. So we would map all of the environmental assets. And this showed a very high likelihood of bat roosts in the wilderness area, but also south of our alignment down at Benton Farmyard. And that suggested that there would be a requirement for us to make sure that the severance caused in their migratory routes would be addressed through some kind of infrastructure in this area to allow that north-south movement between those sites to continue. In terms of green infrastructure, we reviewed local policy. Thurrock Green Grid, which, as I say, has that strategy for connecting up existing elements of green infrastructure, such as Belhurst Park, Little Belhurst Park, Thames Chase Community Forest, as well as green infrastructure groups who had their own proposals that they were working on and moving towards. So Thames Chase had a dual strategy of greenway routes through the borough. So if this is the Mardyke here, you can see the Mardyke Valley, and then links up to Thames Chase Community Forest, which is about here, and also the Forest Circle loop, which also included the Mardyke Trail through here, as well as groups like Land of the Fans, who we mentioned last time. This is some of the volunteers from Land of the Fans who want to see the reunification of that fenland landscape through there. So we looked at all of these different projects, and then we would map them onto our alignment through there. So the alignment you can see here, that's Lower Thames Crossing coming through. Each of these projects has a different reference. So that's Belhurst Park there. Little Belhurst Park was going to be put in here. Here is Thames Chase Forest. And we identified several areas where we would have key impacts on these projects. So if this is the Forest Circle as well, in the sort of light green with the dark green edging, and the greenway routes, we realised we were going to have a big impact, firstly at the Mardyke, secondly at the Thames Chase, but then also key here, which is the area between North and South Ockenden, on the Ockenden Link. And we knew then that this green link we potentially were going to be severing with the alignment, and so we would need to find ways of putting it back to be as good as possible. But when we looked at the current NMUs, walkers, cyclists and equestrian routes, or public rights of way in the area, we noted that actually the environment for those routes is not great. So this is a photograph of North Road. It has no foot or cycle way along it. And some of our collision analysis noted that it was, it's not high numbers, but it was relatively high along North Road because it doesn't have that provision for a north-south cycle route. And the same can be said for other north-south routes. So Dennis's Road as well, which is also a very key route because it also gets you that link underneath the M25, did not have that segregated a route that could be used by non-motorized users along there. So we would need to do something to connect in. So the green routes are actually existing pedestrian rights of way, and these are footpaths. So if you want to join up, for example, between these two footpaths, you have to come off of a safe route, walk along the edge of the road, and then to get back onto the safe route, which isn't ideal. And we also identified here, worth just mentioning, a couple of gaps that we could easily solve. So our proposals do link these two pedestrian rights of way in the future. So when we were looking at different opportunities, we would do mapping to see how many people the opportunity would benefit. So we decided we would look at mapping. If we provided a segregated cycle route that could be used by both pedestrians, equestrians and and cyclists, how much benefit it would have. And one of the things we would do is see if there was a journey time reduction between people and the places they wanted to go if we provided the route. So we looked at the postcodes which are represented by this grid square. And if there was an improvement for the how far they could get to walk or cycle within 30 meters, it would be highlighted on this mapping. So for these people either side of the proposed link along North Road with a segregated cycle and footway, they see improvements in both their walking and cycling times to get to things like recreational activity, to the station, to doctors' places, to places of employment, if they live in these postcodes. But actually, broader, if you live in these postcodes, you do see a reduction in your amount of time it takes to cycle, and the amount of places you can get to within 30-minute cycle from your home by providing that link. And that was okay. But actually, if you look at all the other links that we were going to be providing, some of them through LTC, some of them through other projects, there would be much broader benefits by providing a more coherent pedestrian rights of way and cyclist network across the borough, and you would benefit journey times for a much broader cross section of people. So these are proposals that we're making, that are baked into the DCO design as it was in the last iteration of the design. And you can see here with blue, we're proposing off-road WCH tracks on both North Road and Dennis's Road. And the idea is that they don't just stop either side of the LTC alignment, they link to the top of North Ockendon, and they link up and they catch these two footpaths that are coming in. The other important measure that we have in here as well is, whereas current crossing of the railway is provided by a level crossing, there will now be footbridges that connect North Road and Dennis's Road, so you will not have to take your life in your own hands as you want to cross the railway through here. And also, as a key part of the strategy, we have that link up that takes you up to Thames Chase, Community Woodland, and both sides with the bridge there just outside of Thurrock. But that provides this more coherent network and means that people now can get quite easily to all of the sort of and can do loops and can get access to the services much easier in and around this area, and then go out off into the Mardyke area, so they have much better access to the countryside through there. Because that route then on North Road, so this one here, was particularly important for both pedestrian, cyclists and horse riders, and green infrastructure and species such as bats. That was part of the reason why we decided to upgrade North Road to become a green bridge. So it is the road is maintained, so with one lane either way, but we then have our segregated route for horse riders, cyclists and equestrians on the east. And then there will be planting zones to either side, which will serve a variety of different habitats, including the bats, but also other species such as badgers, and help them move along across the alignment. This is a sort of precedent, which is a Weymouth Relief Road green bridge. This is one that doesn't have trees on, so we're not proposing to put trees on North Road Green Bridge. We're proposing to put hedgerow and lower level shrubs along there, which is what we need to provide. So how that all works in practice. So to go back, this is now looking back towards central London with the M25, going across there with the wilderness here. And you can see this is how Lower Thames Crossing will pass through. North Road Green Bridge is here with its hedgerows linking up and down the road. And there are a number of other key factors in the landscape design in this area to note. So we have a lot of woodland planting just to the north here along the cuttings where we're going up into Thames Chase Community Woodland, but We also wanted to provide woodland blocks along field boundaries, similar to the ones that exist, to break up the alignment of the road along here. We also wanted to make sure we didn't lose trees or too many trees permanently within the woodland, within the wilderness. So here we provide, instead of having the cut, we provide a retaining wall, and that does two things. It helps us retain. We have a watercourse running through here, and it allows us to replant forest all the way up to the edge of the road through this section. The road itself has false cutting to screen it where it's shallowest. So what's happening with the road alignment at this point is it's coming onto embankment at the bottom, or coming off embankment, off of the Mardyke viaduct. It's getting lower in relation to the landscape, as it goes underneath North Road, Green Bridge, and then it starts to rise up again as it goes to the M25 junction. So in those portions where it's higher at the top and at the bottom here, we're providing false cutting to screen it from local users of the local residents and users of the Prow network. So there is a footpath running along here, for example, which is one of the reasons we have the false cutting here to screen the works as they get a little higher. We're also providing an acoustic fence through here to screen the wilderness from the noise of the road as well. And then just to overlay finally, so these are the Nmu routes, or the PCE routes, that run through, and you can see here how the North Road segregated route will link up with the different footpaths that take you across the LTC here and across the railway line to Dennis's Road, and ultimately how that takes you down to Little Belhurst Park and provides a good looping walk. And then you've got the routes north to the Thames Chase Forest Centre as well. So that's the Ockenden Link. That was in a bit more detail. I'm going to speed through a little bit more some of the proposals around the A13 junction now. As well. So this is the A13 junction in its entirety. It's obviously an extensive structure, so I'm going to look at it from two different viewpoints. So I have one viewpoint up here. We're going to look at this stretch in this corner, and then I have another viewpoint that looks up from the Orsett-Cock roundabout. So the Mardyke is just off the page as well. We've got the edge of Grays down here, Baker Street running down through there, and then this is LTC as it goes off down to the Chadwell Link across and down to Tilbury through there, and the 1089 coming down. So this is the existing landscape. It's a sort of intermediate landscape. So it's going from the sort of more flat marshland areas, but it's slightly more raised, and it's another rolling landscape on clays and gravels, slightly elevated above the marshland to the south of the borough. And once again, it's arable, so lots of agricultural fields. But because we do have the edges of the more urban areas, it does have that urban edge condition in places as well. Another thing we noticed was that we do have the A13 running, and because of the way that it's been planted on this slightly elevated ridge, it does have this appearance of a wooded ridge, but the cover is not great, and you do see passing vehicles sometimes. And yeah, we're very close. Obviously, this is Baker Street here. Most people recognise the windmill as a local landmark through there. Other points to note are the Travellers site on the other side of the alignment, and the care home through here. So this is the visualisation we did at StatCon of Decon now, of the junction design, and you will note that essentially what we're trying to do here is to plant it up as much as possible. So our approach to this junction was to try and make sure that we have as much tree planting around the junction, which will ultimately screen it. So these visualizations are done at about 15 years. So the trees will not be this big when they go in, but we will be providing some faster growing species in here like birch and willow, which should get to about 3 meters tall within 5 to 10 years. But we provide as much woodland as we can in the different pockets of land all across the junction. Other key points to note, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Other key points to note is the relocation of the traveller site with the band of planting as well, which is shielding the traveller site from visually screening it on this side as well. We've also doing some work on Blackshots Nature Reserve. So we're losing a chunk of Blackshots Nature Reserve through here. But we're providing more open space habitat through here and including another pond in the area for great crested newts and ecological value. This is an area that we are actively talking to Thurrock about at the moment. So not only the amount of open space provision and its location, but also the types of habitat and the types of design that we want to do with it. Obviously, we are very close to the people of Baker Street at this point. And so there are a number of different screening measures that we have put in place along this edge. So we have acoustic barriers that run the entire length of the junction all the way around through here. And where we had space, and this was a trade-off between where you've got space to put the width of the earthworks in. We have a 2 meter false cut above LTC and through here to help screen the road, as well as the tree planting on top of that. We did have a conversation with the landowner in this parcel, and they did not want us to take up too much of their land plot with earthworks in here. So instead we have a more engineered slope, so a much steeper slope that's providing much the same function with the acoustic barrier sitting on the top. On the other side, we've got a similar arrangement. So very long length of false cutting that runs round the edge of the junction, shielding Blackshots and the traveller side with an acoustic barrier on the top of that, and then all planted with trees as well. So ultimately, in the longer term, screen as much of the junction as we can. Just moving over to the left a little bit, so you can see the traveller site here again, and Blackshots over there. You can see as well the various different pockets extending to the east, so the woodland planting continuing. There are some sizable pockets of planting. These ones through here are accessible from Baker Street. So Baker Street actually continues underneath these structures and runs down where it joins the 1013 that runs along here. So these pockets are accessible for maintenance access from there. And then also, as I say, we've got different extents of false cut and acoustic barriers along here to just provide shielding. In terms of walker cyclists and horse riders, there are two different approaches here. The priority as we're moving down south into the more urban areas was about commuter routes. So two important commuter routes. One was Stifford's Clay Road. So these are running east-west. We know we've got a school here and people want access down into Grays from north of the A13. So there's a new segregated cycle lane which runs parallel to Stifford's Clay Road and joins on with the existing provision along through here. And the other important commuter route is the 1013. Which is running all the way along from existing provision at the Orsett-Cock roundabout and then down to the southwest. With links as well, this is the realigned Baker Street that will take you up through to Baker Street up here, where we'll have another segregated route, so you'll be able to get from Baker Street east and west along that new route. And then parallel to that, there are the provisions that get you out into that landscape, so into that recreational landscape. So new links that take you up to Green Lane, Green Bridge, and then ultimately up to the Mardyke, and also provisions that take you along the new bridge next to the Orsett Showground through here, which is also a really popular route for equestrians, with other links that will then take you down south onto the Chadwell Link as well. And this is just how they overlay. So you can see those important east-west links on the 1013 and on this one's on Stifford's Clay Road as well, with the link up to the north. And then just the view from the Orsett Cock roundabout as well, which is just helpful, I think, to understand in terms of the width of the junction and the number of slip roads which are interacting through here. So that Woodland Planting continues all the way up to the roundabout, and we have a number of different barriers and false cuts running through this area as well, shielding local residents from the road wherever we can, with acoustic barriers as well running throughout here. Finally, the Chadwell Link. So the Chadwell Link, we're running from the A13 junction up here. This is Brentwood Road, which ultimately goes and connects with the Orsett Cock roundabout. And then so the Chadwell Link takes you all the way down between East Tilbury, Linford, and Chadwell St Mary, down into the Tilbury area and the Portal, with this being the Tilbury Loop railway line running through here. Any area you see this sort of sagey green colour, that's area that's going to be returned to agriculture once we've completed our works. The more minty green is new areas of grassland, and the dark green is new areas of woodland. Generally, the landscape character is, once again, that's that undulating farmlands and sands and gravels, the urban exposed edges, but further to the south of the borough, the lines of the pylons do become a little bit more prominent in the landscape. And there's also what we call the sort of the dry valley, which sits, so as you can see here, the land slowly rises in this corner. So this is Muckingford Road through here. This is East Tilbury and Linford, and this is Hofford Road. And this area is important because this is Rainbow Shore woodland running through there. So we're just clipping the south of Rainbow Shore woodland with the alignment. So this new planting up through here is all compensatory planting for the loss of ancient woodland. And the important thing to note about that, and what I spoke about earlier in terms of creating connections, is that what we're trying to do here is we're providing new woodland planting through here, and also reinforced and replacement woodland planting along the edges of Orsett Golf Course, to try and make good on those proposals, to make sure that we link up existing green infrastructure as well as create new habitats. So this sort of stretch and this link is very important in terms of the resilience. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on this area as well, and just describe some of the other measures that we're looking at. So this was another project that was identified through the Green Infrastructure Study. It identified what they call beelines or routes, insect pathways that run through the countryside. And you can see this one through here. This is a beeline in the red dots. Intersects immediately with the area around the Chadwell Link. It's very important as a sort of set of stepping stones for pollinator species, not just bees, but also other pollinator species, as they sort of trying to move east to west through the landscape. And as I said, Thurrock has already a very good habitat for invertebrate species, so it's going to be very important that we put back some good quality for that as well. So once again, the existing condition, looking over Linford, and this is the proposals in the same location that we have for the area. So in response to that beelines project, one of the big things we did was we wanted to include a big area of species-rich grassland in here, which is number 5 on the map, and that gives those invertebrate species, along with Hofford Road Green Bridge, that opportunity to sort of jump over the LTC alignment, so we're not breaking that really important chain of invertebrate and pollinator movement across the project. Other key measures along this stretch were obviously Muckingford Road, which we had identified as an important route, but it's also once again required for a mixture of species, including bats and badgers, so it became a green bridge. We've got Hofford Road Green Bridge, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And we've got to accommodate one of those ponds I mentioned earlier as well for the road, so that needed to be incorporated in the landscape around here as well. There's extensively screened the road in this area, so as it comes down off of the viaduct, which has acoustic barriers on, basically then false cuttings, which rise 4 meters above LTC, take over the screening job until we get to the earthwork surrounding Muckingford Road Green Bridge, which then provide the screening that we need. And then on the other side, once again, we have those long lengths of false cutting. On this side, slightly shorter, as we didn't want to lose too much vegetation in this area on the other side. And then because we have this property quite so close, they have also, on top of that, they have an acoustic barrier to help screen them through here. The two green bridges we have in here, I just wanted to talk about a little bit more as well. I haven't talked about the the woodland planting as well. The swathe that runs through here is a feature that follows the boundaries, follows the valley rather than the alignment. And that's what I spoke earlier about, trying to disguise the alignment so it doesn't show up as a sort of scar in the landscape. So making sure that we sort of follow the existing features of the existing landscape character rather than just run a line of trees across the landscape. So we have new planting through here, and that helps disguise and integrate the road into its environment. In terms of walkers, cyclists and horse riders, the route upon Muckingford Road was identified quite early on as a really potentially important route to get people into Chadwell St Mary, ultimately into the employment opportunities in Grays and Tilbury as well. So East Tilbury here has, if you remember, that very high propensity or capability to be able to cycle, but there are very low numbers of cyclists actually making the journey. So it suggests that there might be suppressed demand for people being able to cycle into work. Car ownership in East Tilbury was also quite low in comparison to the north of the borough, where car ownership is particularly high. So we understood that this might be a key commuter route, but actually Hofford Road, on the other hand, is a very important route for pedestrians, it being a protected laneway. It's one of these sort of old lanes that's been around since Elizabethan times, but is not necessarily a commuter route. It's more likely to be a route for recreational purposes. So if I was to show you just a view of each of those different routes. So this is Muckingford Road, stood right on the edge of East Tilbury, looking westwards back into Thurrock. And you can see once again, good for cars, not so good if you don't want to be in a car. So there's no sort of footway, you have to sort of get your way through the verge. Whereas the opposite really is Hofford Road, which is a protected laneway, which you can only really get down with a 4x4. It's quite muddy, but it has this wonderful sunken character about it as well. So the character of the two green bridges was going to be quite different to reflect the sort of the function and the surrounding landscape character. So once again, Muckingford Road is a 30-metre wide green bridge. It's providing those corridors for bats and badgers either side. The road surface, but then the segregated 3.5-metre wide route for cyclists, horse riders and pedestrians. And whereas the Hofford Road, we didn't want to put a wide carriageway in there because it would be out of keeping with the rest of the route. So it's the natural track, the same width as the protected laneway, with raised beds on either side to try and help recreate that sunken lane character along its route. It's important to note, I think, particularly on Muckingford Road, that the route, the segregated cycle route, actually extends for 120 metres beyond the line of the bridge. So it should be providing good connectivity for people in East Tilbury with the places that they want to go. And then finally, and sorry it's taken so long, but there are a number of different projects which we are still working on and discussing with officers. So the officers have highlighted some additional green links that they would like to be seen. They'd like to see more detail, particularly on the opportunities that we did not take forward in the DCO proposals, and we'll be looking to share information with them on that. And we're looking at the Hatch report recommendations for green infrastructure and open space, and also with some additional green infrastructure proposals coming forward from Thurrock. And then there are some developments around our mitigations, which mean we might be making potential amendments to the Tilbury Fields proposals, which could work quite well in the context of the Tilbury to Stamford La Hope Riverside Legacy project that officers are working on. Around, I mentioned previously, open space around Blackshots Nature Reserve. We're looking at the detailed design and configuration of that. And we're also going to be bringing forward very shortly the outline ecology and landscape management plan for discussion with you, which talks not only about what we're doing, but also who is going to be looking after and maintaining each of those elements of work. And that's it for me. So we're on to questions.
Thank you, Claire. I'm sure there will be some questions. It's such a lot of information to
yeah, I'm
in.
sorry. Yeah, it is a lot to try and get across. Yeah.
If you could just unshare your screen, please.
Yeah.
Perfect. Lucy, did you see who had their hand raised first?
Yeah, so it's Councillor Spillman and then Laura Blake.
Councillor Spillman.
Good evening all. Thank you for that presentation. It was very thorough, but obviously there were a lot of questions that come from it. In terms of the wildlife that's going to be destroyed, in terms of how many trees, and has there been calculation as to how many invertebrates and other animals are going to be destroyed as a result of the actual project?
Yes. So in one of the slides at the beginning, if I get that right, so we have done various calculations and it's broken down to quite a fine grain. So for example, on ancient woodland, we're losing 4.35 hectares. And then with our compensation, we're planting 18.39 hectares. So it depends. I mean, it's how you want it quantified. It's generally done in area rather than the numbers of trees, and the numbers of critters, of animals, really. But there have been quite detailed work. Has been quite detailed work done on it.
Okay, can I follow that up, Chairman? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Brilliant. So in terms of the new planting, obviously you've said a huge number of trees. I mean, I think there's only, I was reading, I was just trying to get some sort of context for the number you were saying, and it's only about 55,000 trees in Epping Forest. So it is a huge number you're talking about. But how many of those trees do you think will actually get to maturity? Has that been looked into?
So we've been discussing it, and that's one of the conversations about density. So the densities that we plant at. So there's two schools of thought. One, that we could plant very densely, but then it means some of the trees would never come to full growth, but it would provide you sort of more immediate impact. Or we could provide them more sparsely, and then they would all grow to maturity. So that is a conversation to be had about how many of them will survive. We are going to be providing whips, so smaller trees. So they will be small when they go in, which is why I wanted to make that point about these visuals being 15-year growth, because they will be quite small immediately. But the good thing about smaller trees is that they stand more of a chance of surviving. The older the tree is, when you move it, the more likely it is to die. So we'll be doing everything we can to ensure their survival. And a lot of that's to do with careful specification, but I can't tell you exactly how many will survive. And it does take careful maintenance, because, you know, there was that thing with HS2 and they didn't water them and a load of them died.
And are you going to be maintaining them? Is that going to be the council's responsibility?
So if it's essential mitigation, then essentially Highways England has a responsibility to maintain them. We're going to be, as I say, discussing the outline landscape and ecology management plan, and there may be areas where Thurrock would like to take on the maintenance of certain areas, which we will be looking to discuss with the officers and with yourselves.
Brilliant. And just one final one, although I'll ask another question later, but in terms of the invertebrates and insects, although it would be amusing to watch hundreds of Highways England workers catching individual insects and moving them to different locations, that's not going to happen, is it? You're going to destroy, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of insects. And are you entirely confident that these new areas that you're building after that devastation will allow a repopulation of those species? And also, in terms of insects and invertebrates, like a big motorway is extremely dangerous, and you're going to have a much higher mortality in these species as a result of them being next to a road. And some of those species might not even take to being so close to a road. So are you confident that you're going to, in terms of biodiversity, taking into those points, that we are actually going to see something better than what we've got at the moment? Because I find that I'm doubtful about that, to put it mildly, and I'd like to see where you've got your evidence. I'd like to see the evidence that is going to happen, because I'm very doubtful about that.
So I will say, so in Thurrock, as I said at the beginning, we're mainly going through fields, and I'm sure you've seen all the stuff in the news recently about how lots of the fields that we have at the moment, and because of modern farming methods, are not great for biodiversity. So DEFRA is trying to get farmers to put back hedgerows, for example, at the moment, to try and improve biodiversity and have a more sustainable form of farming. So a lot of the stuff that we're taking out is not particularly high value. Where we do take things out, like Low Street Pit, it is very high value, but it is a relatively small area, and we're going to put back much bigger areas. So ultimately, I'm quite confident that we will be providing better biodiversity in Thurrock than we will when we arrive. Yeah.
Can I just,
I don't know.
cheeky and say one more thing? Go for it. Yeah.
Can I just actually come in on that? Just because you've actually raised a really important point regarding invertebrates, and it is one of those issues about providing habitat beside the road. Insects often do get killed flying across. There has been a lot of work carried on. I've been involved in several meetings with Natural England and the ecologists looking at the off-site mitigation. So it is something we are looking at and trying to make sure most of the key invertebrate habitats are actually, Claire used the technical term open mosaic habitat, which is the brownfield habitat, so places around the North Portal, for example. And what we're needing are those large areas to be created, and so that's something which we're working with Natural England and Bug Life are involved to try and make sure we get those areas to a sort of suitable level. But I really I appreciate the concern, because that is one of the things where if it is just planting down the side of the road.
So can I just request, would it be possible for you to provide the council or us councillors with the evidence base that you've got? Because although it's great hearing we're going to plant some extra areas, it's going to be a lot more biodiverse, But in terms of repopulation of those areas as a result, what is there an evidence base that you're drawing upon here, or is it sort of a assumption without
So,
that?
I mean, I'm not an ecologist, so
No.
I'm gonna say that now, and I can speak to the ecologist about it. But they are using best practice, and they are engaging, as I say, with Natural England to make sure that they have the best practice processes. So we can look at previous projects that have succeeded and employ the same sort of methods again.
It would be very helpful if you could provide that sort of information about previous projects to us, so that we'd have those assurances. That would be fantastic.
Thank you. And yes, if you support Councillor Spillman in that, if we could have see that research, that would be fantastic. Laura Blake.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Very thorough, and it's nice to again be getting the information that we have been asking for so long. So I appreciate the time that you put into producing that, and the fact that you've covered some of the issues that we raised in the last meeting and brought that to us tonight. Thank you very much for that. Just to echo what was just said previously in the questions, I too would be interested in that, because obviously you're telling us about the actual bee migration and invertebrate and pollinators migration. They're not necessarily going to know to go and use those two little green bridges in the scheme of how short that is as a crossing, are they, compared to the actual space that they currently have. And I'd also, just on the tree aspect, can I ask, are you actually considering the wilderness as the ancient woodland that it is? Because there wasn't any mention to it or reference to it being ancient woodland when it is actually.
No. So as far as I know, it's not designated as ancient woodland. The project did make a decision to classify Rainbow Shore as ancient woodland, though I don't think that is officially designated as well. But no, we have not taken account as the wilderness as ancient woodland. This is the first time I've heard that it was suggested that it be ancient woodland, because, as I say, no one's ever told me it's been designated as such.
Local history and knowledge will back up the fact it goes back a long way. That is definitely an ancient woodland in there, from what I've learned and been told from asking very few people. So I've got that information there. So can I ask that that's something that you look into, please, and take on board that local knowledge is that it is an ancient woodland, and can you look into that further, please?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. And then moving on to the Green Bridge up there in North Road. A little bit confusing when I'm looking at the sort of cross-section sketch that you're showing compared to that image of the photo that's a possible equivalent of what we might expect, because it actually looks, when you zoom in and look at where you've overlaid the proposed route, that it is actually a much more concrete structure. So it looks like we are potentially getting a much bigger, wider bridge that doesn't look as green in reality as you're showing in that image of the one in Weymouth, I think it was.
So I don't know the width of the one in Weymouth, but I can give you, absolute widths of the one that we've got at North Road. So it's about, just over half of it is going to be planted up with green. So when you've got the carriageway width of 9.3 metres, and then if you take the width of the segregated cycle lane at 3 metres, that leaves about 55% of it will be planted up. So it probably isn't perfectly mapping onto the Weymouth one, because I don't have the figures for it, but I did think it was important to note. So it's going to be planted up with hedgerow and shrubs. It's not going to be planted up with trees, which is why I picked the Weymouth precedent for it rather than the width of the thing.
It was just thanks. It was just trying to compare when I zoomed in on the actual image where you've overlaid the proposed route. When you zoom in, the structure looks to be a lot more concrete rather than green. So that worries me, that it could be that we're potentially getting a much bigger, wider bridge that's got a lot more concrete and bringing a lot more concrete and structure into the area, rather than it being what most people would consider to be a green wildlife crossing bridge. It was just something I noticed in the short time we had before when I zoomed in and was looking at it.
It is, it is a multifunctional bridge, and it's actually quite hard I was trying to find the best precedent to show you. It's quite hard to find one that is exactly the same as Muckingford Road. You know, they're all slightly different. So the Weymouth ones, for example, can also be footbridges rather than have a road on them. So trying to find exactly the right one. What I can say is that what we will do, you asked about additional visualizations, is we'll try and get you a visualization of our bridge so that you'll get more of a feel for how it looks.
Thank you. Chair, I've got other questions, but if you want to jump to some others to give them a chance, I'm quite happy with that if you prefer.
Yeah, we'll jump around the task force a little bit. Thanks, Laura. I've got a question, perhaps two, but you might be able to answer them in perhaps the same way. So obviously residents of Thurrock are going to have a lot of disruption through construction of a project of this size. That's no matter how much mitigation you put in place, that's always going to be an issue. When it comes to things like the 22 kilometres of upgraded travel routes, effectively, for walkers, cyclists and horse riders, are these things that residents will only get the benefit of using at the end of everything when the whole project is delivered, or will they be opened up into a phased structure, so as things become available to be used, then residents can start using them?
That is a good question. I might throw to Ben for that one, because we have been doing, I think, a little bit more thinking about how it might be rolled out in the future. Ben, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone. We've done, as Claire says, we've done a little bit of thinking on that, but we're not that far advanced in terms of knowing which routes will be open at which point in the construction process. But we will endeavour to try and open things when it's reasonable to be able to open them, rather than just have them finished, ready, sat there, closed. People can't use them when they could be. So although we can't give you absolute figures and numbers and dates as yet, we will do what we can.
I think it was part of the challenge of the Hatch report as well, for us to look in a bit more detail at the construction phase NMUs. We've been very focused on the permanent case, so we are just going to look a little bit more at the construction impact on the pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders, damn it, walkers, horse riders and cyclists. Yes.
I'm pleased you're looking into it. Yes, absolutely. And on a similar vein, I suppose, in terms of the tree planting and the hedgerows and things like that, you said they can take 10 to 15 years to even mature. I know there's going to be some whips put in and things like that. So is this something, again, will be literally once the road's done and then the tree planting and things begin, or will that sort of evolve around as the route moves along in its construction?
That's our worst case assumption at the moment, that the trees are put in once the construction is complete. Yes.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more questions on that sort of further down the line. It's just with such a long-term project and with trees coming to be mature, it could be a couple of decades before residents actually get that benefit of that mitigation, which I think is really important to bear in mind.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Lucy, could let me know who was next, please.
It's Councillor Muldowney and then Councillor Allen.
Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Claire, very much for that presentation. It was very detailed. It's good to hear some of that detail. I was listening quite keenly about the Chadwell Link as a local councillor in Chadwell. I know that we've got some very people who are very keen on local history, and regularly there are walks in the area. So I couldn't really hear in your presentation that there was going to be much benefit for the people in Chadwell. Was that something that just is not there, or it wasn't, you didn't have enough time to put that into your presentation? The last time I went on a local history walk, it was actually a couple of our more mature walkers had to drop out because they're just, you know, they're basically walking in furrows in fields, and there was no path along the public pathway that was really passable for anybody who wasn't very young and very fit.
Okay. I might pass that one over to Ben as well.
Okay, yeah. So there's a footpath that comes north of Chadwell. I think it's footpath 97, possibly 79, which heads up towards Rectory Road. So that At the moment, as you say, it's a footpath through a field that will be upgraded to bridleway with surface improvements. So that will increase accessibility up to the new bridge at Raytree Road, which will have an equestrian zone as well as a pedestrian and cyclist zone, both off-road. So that will improve connectivity up to the north and obviously to Orsett Showground and beyond. East out of Chadwell, there's the route alongside Linford and then Muckingford Road, which Claire was talking about earlier, which connects all the way through to East Tilbury. So that will provide access for cyclists and horse riders and pedestrians, which again is both a recreational thing, but also helping to connect people of Chadwell to East Tilbury and vice versa. So that dashed blue line along Muckingford Road, that's a cycle, horse riding and pedestrian route. And that also connects up with the old Coal Road, which we're diverting to go beneath the viaduct, and then that connects to Bridleway 58 and heads towards Coalhouse Fort.
Going down there, that was the route. Okay. So that's Brentwood Road there, isn't it? And then this is a footbridge.
That's
as well.
Yeah, Bridleway.
Bridleway, sorry. Yeah. So there are other bits and pieces which we didn't focus on the sort of north of the Chadwell Link, there as well.
But not a great deal really. Also, I didn't because obviously it comes very near to people's houses, that part of the link there.
Yeah.
I didn't, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear about protection for that. Will that be the bit that's in false cuttings, or will there be acoustic barriers? How are you protecting that conurbation there?
Let me, sorry, I have another presentation. If I can just share quickly, if I get the right one. No, that's the wrong one. Yeah, here we go. So through here, I don't have a visualization of it, okay. But can you see that? So here, there is the green lines through here. That is false cutting along the edge through there. And where it breaks down, that's because, once again, we've got earthworks around the bridge. So that should be pretty much screened with a 4-metre false cutting along that edge there. So you will have screening through there.
Okay, there's no acoustic barriers.
That's on a different drawing, and I would need to go and find that out for you.
Okay.
So I could potentially, I'll have a look for that for you just to see.
Okay, thank you. So not an awful lot really happening for Chadwell there.
I think it's fair to say that particularly for non-motorised users, we're really focusing on those east-west links through here rather than the north-south. But there is that idea that it will be a really good connection up into the Orsett Fenland as well, but not a lot. They're quite well provided for with footpaths around here, so it's been a case of making sure that we put them back as sensitively as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire. Basically, following on from Councillor Spillman's concern regarding invertebrates, bugs and critters, as Claire calls them. I do understand that we're very fortunate, in areas of our borough where we've got, I do believe, a protected species of the great crested newt. Now, I think it's very important that if we do come across such species, they are absolutely protected. Not like, they can be caught. I'm sure they can be caught and moved to a safer place. So do you know if we are going to come across any of those ponds or small streams that we're going to disturb and ensure that we do protect such such protected species like the great crested newt, Claire, please?
So once again, I'm not an ecologist and I'm not 100%, I haven't looked at all of the ecological mapping for this. I do know that we are providing habitat for great crested newts. So that suggests, so in the proposals that we're putting forward, I mentioned that we'll be providing a pond, for example, at Blackshots Nature Reserve for great crested newts. So that suggests that we are disturbing habitat. I don't know, Andrew, do you know any more detail about great crested newts?
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so along the route, particularly around kind of Chadwell, there are kind of provisions for great crested newts within the open mosaic habitats that we're providing. Again, the ecologist is probably the best person to kind of answer the exact numbers and locations, but we are providing kind of replacement ponds. And I think to kind of expand on kind of an earlier point, I think the ecologist has factored in that these habitats need to be created beforehand to translocate some of the species affected. So this is why we're kind of concentrating on habitat areas beyond like the kind of the highways boundary, as it were. So we've identified pockets of land within the order limits to create these habitats, so then we can then place them once the habitat is ready for them to be received. So again, probably it could be another question for the ecologist to show where exactly these areas are, but they've definitely been taken into account in terms of the ecology plan.
Chair, if I can just jump in again as an ecologist as well as landscape architect, it's the ecology. There are sort of various processes where you have the from the surveys you have the standard collection and moving of animals, and then there's the process of what happens if you find them whilst you're doing construction, and that has been sort of covered in the various documents. I think the issue from a Thurrock point of view is things like great crested newts are well understood and what's required is understood. It's the specialist things like the invertebrates, which don't have as much protection, but actually are much rarer and less well understood. And that's that's why there's been a lot of focus on those, because there certainly are a Thurrock sort of speciality.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If I could just come back. So, Steve, you're actually saying that the invertebrates are sort of more rarer, so therefore they would be protected too. As Councillor Spillman said, that we don't actually know how many are going to be destroyed through this project, and I should imagine it's going to be many hundreds of thousands, and hundreds probably of species that are going to be destroyed, and I share the same concerns as Councillor Spillman, and we already know that even the snakes that we've got, the adder is, I do believe, protected again. So there are some protected species, and we have to ensure that they remain protected, and that we can save as much as we can, through this. Well, I call it an environmental and ecological disaster. I've said it from the onset. I'm sticking to my words, and I still believe that's what this project will be. It's most certainly going to drive a stake through the beating heart of Thurrock. I'd just like to touch on the trees as well, if I could have some more information on the trees. We talk about established trees, but I understand that juvenile trees actually do more. A juvenile tree, whilst growing, works harder than an actual established tree. So I was going to ask, you're talking about, I think it was 385,000 trees in total. How many of them trees will be planted as saplings, so very small trees, and we are at risk of losing, I think it's 1 in 3, something like that, especially if they're not irrigated properly, watered properly. So they do need a bit of care as they establish. But once they establish, they generally do quite well, I believe. So if you can give me some more information on the 385 trees, being how many will be saplings, how many will be whips, I think the next ones are along, and then it goes up to more established trees. So if you could give us a little bit more information on them, if you could.
So go on, Andrew. Yeah,
I think to kind of expand on this, I think, the majority of the tree planting would be what we call kind of whips or kind of bare root stock, because as you say, they're more kind of better kind of situated to the local kind of landscape conditions. So we take into account the kind of the likely failure rate of any new planting. So the idea being that we plant quite densely at the start with quite a large amount of kind of bare root stock, on the understanding that, like I say, quite a lot of these might not establish as fully as we kind of expect. And as part of the kind of landscape and ecology management plan that we're putting together, we'll be kind of targeting at when we go into these areas and thin them out. So that's the kind of a strategy that we're looking at, because the kind of, like I say, the bare root plants are much better to kind of grow and be more successful rather than trying to plant what we call kind of more standard plants, which could standard trees, which would be like 2 to 3 meters high. They're a much greater risk of failure, and going in to replace those would be quite a bit of a job. So in terms of the overall management of these woodlands, we'd look to plant quite dense and then kind of go and selectively thin them out as the kind of management process goes along. And I think I agree in terms of how they kind of work kind of much harder. Like I say, the whole idea of planting quite densely as well is that the kind of the canopy can form much more quicker. And then this can in turn kind of keep down invasive weeds within the woodland kind of ground cover, which kind of could ease some initial maintenance, but also allow that kind of sheltered ground cover to allow more of your kind of woodland understory planting to form. So in terms of creating more biodiverse, it's kind of, that's what we're kind of looking at as well. There's different approaches that we can take, but we feel like kind of more dense planting of bare root stock is kind of better in the long run.
So out of the 385,000 trees, we might only end up with, say, 250,000 of them through losing some of them.
Yes, I think it's typical as a woodland. All woodland has tree loss, and then new saplings grow underneath. There's kind of that kind of natural regeneration of woodland within these areas. So yeah, we'd look to plant as many as we can on the understanding that not all of them would be kind of kept in 15 years' time. We're certainly not looking at 385,000 trees in 15 years. If anything, we'll be going along and do some selective thinning of specimens, take the best examples and take out some others as part of the long-term management.
Thank you for your response, and thank you, Chair.
I was just going to add, it's not just the fact that that you have to, the denser you plant the trees, the more thinning you have to do. So you end up with the same number of trees in the end, but it is getting that balance of how many you plant, how close together, because there's pros and cons, but you end up having to take out do the thinning as well.
Thank you all.
Lucy, is anyone who hasn't asked a question got their hand raised at all?
So it's Chris Stratford next, and then Councillor Rice.
Yeah, if we go in that order, please. Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't going to ask a question, obviously. I just thought I'd make a couple of comments on what was said in the past. In terms, when Councillor Jester has asked about the phasing of the walking, cycling and horse riding routes, I just thought if there's any particular ones that you would like to see early or earlier, if you could let me know, and we can talk to Highways England about that. And similarly, we are talking to them, or will be talking to them, about additional routes or additional links for those routes. And if there's any in particular, such as the ones that Councillor Maldoni was mentioning, that you would like to see added to what's already proposed, then please let me know, and I can then make sure we talk to Highways England about how we introduce to those. And finally, of course, as part of the environmental statement, lots of surveys were done of most of the invertebrates and animals that exist and birds that exist in the area. And by virtue of the regulations, those surveys have to be current within 2 years of the submission. So that certainly was true of the original submission date. I'm not sure if it is, they might need to update them to be sure, but we should know, for instance, great crested newts, we should know exactly where they all are. Bats certainly where they all are, and whether that needs updating or not. So the database that's probably in the appendices of the ES do have all that information. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think it might be worth us bringing this back into the task force when we talk about the phasing and prioritisation of routes and things like that. It sounds like that would be a good one for us to discuss around the room. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Claire, you put up that drawing about the false cutting location and heights around the Chadwell St Mary and Orset Heath area. It would be most useful if we could have that as an email sent to us so we can share it with people along that route. And also, when you're going round the tip of the Chadwell St Mary and Orset Heath areas, I take it also we will be planting lots of trees there. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, you are correct in saying that. So first on the false cut drawing, I believe Gary gave it to me. I think it's something he shared with the task force previously. Is that right, Gary? So you should have it already.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah. In fact, the actual precise location is actually shown on map book 3 on the engineering plans that are on the site. I mean, if you wanted to have a look at the detail, but by all means, I mean, one of these we can share the slide that Claire's given.
Yeah, that would be most helpful, Gary, if that could be shared with us. So it would give us a better understanding of what's going on at that location. Yes.
If I could just come in there, Councillor Rice, it was part of the task force presentation, admittedly a while ago, but it was on the 21st of September last year, and it was slide 13 of the so it is out there in the public, so it'd be easy enough to transfer it to you.
Well, that would be great. If you can get that to me, I'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
And then, yes, there is, I was just looking, there is quite a lot of woodland planting and also hedgerow planting up around that top end of the Chadwell Link as well.
Well, that would be most useful because when we have that particular slide emailed to us, we're able to share that with local people so they can understand what protection is coming in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Lucy, can you let me know, please, on hands?
Councillor Spillman, Laura Blake, Councillor Shinnick.
We have Councillor Shinnick first, just as she hasn't asked a question, please.
Good evening. Just wondered if there's going to be any wildflower planting at all. You know, you're talking a lot about trees, but I'm just interested to see if you're going to put any wildflowers in at all.
Andrew?
Yes, so the principle that we're using kind of throughout the scheme is trying to use quite a lot of what we call species-rich grassland instead of kind of your traditional grass verge or kind of amenity grassland. This kind of has two benefits. Kind of species-rich grassland doesn't require any kind of improvement to soil and actually benefits from being placed on kind of almost bare earth and gets that kind of natural seed bank in. And secondly, it's also just to improve the kind of the biodiversity of this area as well and trying to create these links throughout the route via the use of species-rich grassland. So throughout the entirety of the scheme, but particularly in Thurrock, where we've got that existing beelines project, where we're trying to create these kind of hopping stones between areas, we're looking to increase the amount of species-rich grassland where possible.
Okay, thank you. Only I know a lot of other boroughs do all this now, and it's something I'd like to see in Thurrock because it does look quite attractive as well in the area. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Claire, could I ask you, just when you were covering the footpaths along the old A13, the A1013, you were mentioning about an east-west connection there, and it looked, from what I could see on the presentation, that you were presenting that as though it was a new connection, whereas as far as I'm aware, there is facility along there. Could you expand and explain to us what the difference we would experience in that if you're saying it's new, whereas we know that you can walk and cycle along there? Can you explain that to me, please?
I believe it's improved, but I will hand over to Ben.
Thank you.
Yes, it is indeed improved. You're right. There is an existing off-road provision there, which is essentially a pavement with some signs. So what would be going back there instead is an offset from the road. So the existing provision is straight up against the road. So there would be an offset from the road and then a 3.5 metre wide track, which is in excess of the existing provision. So the width of the existing provision varies, but is around 2 metres. So it would be a vastly increased width and further from the road.
Okay, so essentially just widening what's already there rather than really an upgrade in any surface or anything like that. It's just really the width that you're talking about as an upgrade?
Largely on the distance from the road to make it a more pleasant route.
Consistent with current standards, yeah.
Right, okay. And also you mentioned about open spaces in the Blackshots area. Now that is an open space right the way through, really, from the 1089 right through to where the residential area starts. So can you just explain, how do you gain open space when it is already open space?
So it's more of a technical definition. So open space is more about it being publicly accessible. So even though some of the fields are they feel open, they are not necessarily publicly accessible open space. So some of those fields will be redesignated as open space, and they will not be farmed anymore. They will be handed over to replace the habitat, the sort of the open mosaic habitat that we've been talking about, rather than being farmed. So you're right, it won't feel any more open. It's more of a sort of planning designation really for it.
And just one more, if I may, you mentioned farming there. I haven't heard any mention of grade 1 agricultural land. Is that something that we can look forward to in another presentation, or is there any kind of information that can be made available on the impacts to agricultural land, and in particularly grade 1, because obviously that is very high importance to the environment as well?
Yes, no, you're right. I mean, I haven't really talked too much about agricultural land. There's been a constant conversation about agricultural land as we go through. So, for example, when we were talking about the species-rich grassland around the Chadwell Link, we were having conversations with the landowner there who asked us to move it a little bit, modulate it a little bit, because he had some of his best farmland where we wanted to put it previously. So, yes, we've had a lot of conversations with landowners, particularly around their best fields, as you say. But where we can, we've put things back to agriculture. Sometimes my team want to take a little bit more, and do a little bit more in terms of biodiversity, but it is definitely a balance between that and returning land for agriculture. We hope we've got that balance right, is all I can say in the proposals, but it will depend on who you talk to about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you talk to most residents, they prefer you didn't touch the agricultural land or any other land at all. So, yeah, I fully appreciate that. I know other people wanting to ask questions, so I will shut up now and let someone else jump in. I have more if anyone wants, or I'll submit them later in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Just because we've nearly come up for 2 hours on this item, and we're in danger of extending the meeting before we're actually into the full agenda. Has anyone else got their hand up, please, Lucy?
We've got Councillor Spillman, Councillor Allen and Robert Quick.
If we can make these quite final questions, please, members. Councillor Spillman?
Yeah, just to say, I think it might be of value to, I mean, if Highways England are amenable to this, to come back and to have a discussion centred around ecology, with some projections of worst case, expected case, and best case scenario, because these are important issues. It's not just about insects. The knock-on effects in terms of pollination, in terms of bird species, can be very, very significant. So I think it would be of value to not only the councillors but to local residents if we could have a very frank discussion about what we can expect. And again, I'll just mention one thing that I've mentioned many times, and I will say, I mean, I know this takes work with Thurrock Council as well, but for me, it's a disappointment that we haven't got a big ticket development in terms of green development. We've got a lot of planting to cover, to hide, to maintain biodiversity, and a lot of it is closed around the edge of the road and closed between roads. But from my perspective, I think this is it's a much more saleable project if you do go away and you do have discussions with Thurrock Council and you bring that big ticket nature reserve item to us, perhaps around the Ockenden area where there's a huge scope for it. I personally, it would make the whole project a lot smoother. I mean, I'm against the project, but it would make it a lot smoother, and it would give much more social value to the people of Thurrock if that was on the table. So I'd be grateful if that could be discussed.
Yeah, so we're having conversations with Thurrock officers now. That's as much as I'm going to say. Sorry.
I understand, yes. I understand.
We are. Yeah.
Thank you both. Robert, quick.
Hi, Claire. I got cut off from the meeting for a couple of minutes, so I apologise if the question I'm going to ask has already been covered by someone else. But you mentioned early on in the presentation that there were 16 green infrastructure groups involved in this piece of work. Can you tell us who these groups are?
Now you're asking. Wow. Okay, give me a sec. I counted them earlier, so I must have them somewhere. I know that some of them were DEFRA bodies like the Environment Agency. It might take me
RSPB. Shall I help you out, Claire? I think
yeah, go on. Yeah.
There was RSPB, Essex Wildlife Trust, the Kent Wildlife Trust, Bug Life, Thames Chase, Land of the Fans. There were some of the small groups in Kent. There was it was quite a sort of mixed bag, which has sort of resulted in this sort of slightly uneven sort of arrangement of projects, which is the issue we have. That's one of the things why we want to sort of be working on looking at some Thurrock-based projects and some of the big ticket ones which were being referred to. So yeah, that's what we're trying to address. But okay, there was a mix of them.
So will we see the results of their contribution to this study?
So Thurrock have seen the green infrastructure study. Have I got that right, Steve? Have you seen the output?
We have.
No, you have. Yes. Okay. And you had comments, which is why we are now having another round of conversations about it.
Yeah. It's a sort of huge, great study. It's sort of 300 odd pages long. Yes, it's one of those things. It's a sort of a lot of groups putting in their projects rather than more detailed analysis of all the green infrastructure. Because obviously we've talked a lot about the ecology and landscape, but as I mentioned, there was no talking to community groups and finding out what local people wanting in their area.
Yeah. I have to say, so Ben has also spoken extensively to stakeholders on cycling and horse riding as well, which I don't know if they were amongst the 16, and I can't find the list right now.
They weren't. But there's been your colleagues have been to the local access forum in the past, but obviously they haven't met since for the last year or so because of obvious reasons.
Yeah, but that's definitely one of the areas we often get a lot of community interest and interest groups asking us questions. So we've done quite a lot of engagement there.
Okay, it's although you said there's 16 groups involved, that's fine. The more people involved, the better. But it'd be helpful for us to know what that involvement actually has led to. So we've been asking a lot of questions, which may have been already asked, and you have some answers that you could give us.
Yes, I will have to take it offline because, as Steve said, it's a 300-page document, and I can't find the list in it at the moment. But yeah, there has been a lot of work, and yeah, we can maybe get back to you a little bit on that.
Share a summary anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have an actual question, but I do, however, have some what I feel is some very important information that should be brought to the attention of the committee tonight. And it's regarding an article last week that was published in the Guardian newspaper, and it come under the headlining of £27 billion road plan in doubt after Shapps overrode official advice. Now, we're talking about the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, who's apparently has dismissed guidance and called for a review of environmental impact, which does include the Lower Thames crossing. And he's saying that it's incompatible with environmental and air quality commitments. They're also saying that a major element of air pollution has been identified as particulates from tyres, now which would worsen by more traffic, even with a transition, Chair, to electric vehicles. So I did send that article out to some members. I don't know if they read it, but I think it's a very important thing where we've got, you know, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. He's actually in doubt himself of the environmental impact that this roadway will cause. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I'm sure it's something the task force will discuss going forward. If unless there's any more hands raised.
No more hands raised.
Laurie, are you happy to take your questions offline if you have any further?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Chair. Could I just ask if we have any future presentations from Highways England, could I respectfully ask that we can maybe get it a bit quicker than a couple of hours before the meeting, just so that we can review it and be a little bit more prepared when we have our questions ready for you, so that maybe we're a little bit easier on the questions with you and we know what we want to ask, please.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I like to tinker until the end, I'm afraid. Yeah, but I'll try and get them a bit earlier.
And I appreciate the fact that you have come back to us this month with the further presentation, but if at all possible, if we can get it a little bit earlier than a couple of hours before the meeting, it would be helpful, please. Thank you.
Claire, could I add just one more bit of feedback on your presentation? The use of the cursor to indicate positions on the pages that you showed was not clear at all. So if there's some other way you could indicate what you're pointing at.
I will try and find a better way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, with that, Claire and your team, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. The level of detail again is really good to see, and we look forward to picking up on some of the points we've discussed that will be discussed with officers and the task force in the future. Thank you very much, and you're free to enjoy the rest of your evenings, or if you'd like to stay, you're very welcome.
I think I might go, but thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Moving on, declarations of interest, back to the main agenda. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? Lucy, any hands raised?
No, no hands raised.
No. Moving on then, I'm going to, I'd like to move a motion without notice to suspend council procedure rule 11.1 to allow for the meeting to continue beyond the 2.5 hour time limit. Does anyone support that? Second it.
Yes, I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah.
Moving on. Thank you, Councillor Rice. Moving on to item 5, which is a summary of the energy white paper document, and that is going to be for Chris to present. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Okay, as you all know, white papers are a government tool for presaging future legislation and setting out their proposals. And this one was released on the 14th of December, and it followed the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green recovery from COVID. And it had 4 main parts to it: transforming energy supply to build a greener future. Second one was reforming the energy system. The third one was creating a fairer deal for energy consumers. And the last one was supporting a green recovery from the pandemic. Now, having looked through it, I mean, it sets out some big ticket items that talks about needing to cut 230 million metric tons of emissions. It commits to supporting up to another 220,000 jobs in a greener economy, and a whole range of new things: major power generation, carbon capture, storage, hydrogen projects, etc., retrofitting homes and buildings, clean heat technologies. But when you look through it all, and I was trying to discover what in all the many proposals, and there are about 30 odd proposals summarised, which I've set out in the paper, there are very few of them that apply, well, only one that really might apply to the LTC project, and only 4 others that might apply in some way to the local plan. So if I can just concentrate on those, the one on page 2 at the bottom, support the rollout of charging and associated grid infrastructure to support drivers to make the switch to electric vehicles. There was a £2.8 billion package announced by government to roll out charging points, etc. And if this transpires, then it should accelerate the number of electrical vehicles that might use the road, and all roads, in fact. And that was the only proposal that had any bearing on the LTC, I thought. There were other things that might affect how the local plan develops, and I'm sure the local plans team's got it built in, but they're prohibiting gas grid connections to new homes built 2025 onwards to be replaced by cleaner alternatives. So that will make a difference, I think, to the longer term housing proposals that Thurrock has. New homes have to be built to zero carbon standards, and the EPC band C by 2035, and by B by 2030. So the requirement for domestic and non-domestic buildings to comply with clean energy requirements is going to intensify through the period. How that affects the local plan, I'm not entirely certain at this point, but I mean, it was a pretty groundbreaking white paper, and it will presumably, once comments have come in, be followed up by legislation. But the summary is there for 5 pages. This was culled by me from questioning the internet and finding out what was part of it, and reading the actual document, which is 170 pages. It's not a light read. So I don't know whether I'll be able to ask and answer any questions, but if you want to ask, I certainly give it a shot.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, it's interesting to see how little it directly affects the LTC. Yeah, the only question that springs to mind for me, I'm certainly no expert when it comes to either energies or gas in any way, but on the gas grid connections to new homes from 2025, I'm right in thinking though, I don't think that applies to hydrogen gas, which can be delivered through the existing network. And the only reason I mention it is in terms of we are obviously going to have a large bit of infrastructure if the Lower Thames crossing comes through the middle of Thurrock, and how could that affect maybe future grid connections and things like that? That's the highlight I could find from the wording.
I think you'll find that's right. Certainly, there's a certain amount of concentration on nuclear because they want to build one more project before the end of the Parliament. They want to create a lot more offshore wind, and they want an advanced nuclear fund. But certainly hydrogen is relatively emission-free, and I believe they want to develop 5 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen production by 2030. So hydrogen is very much there. Not sure it's being used much for car power, but certainly for housing.
Thank you, Chris. Lucy, we know about hand, please.
Councillor Spillman, Laura Blake, and then Councillor Allen.
Councillor Spillman, please.
Brilliant. I'm going to go horribly off topic here slightly, but I'll just give a bit of a note of optimism, which is rare in these meetings, obviously, because we're discussing something which is fundamentally grim. I mean, the white paper is very good to read. One of the great things is that, you know, you can argue about pace of change, you can argue about lots of different things, but I think it's heartening to us tree huggers, and I think we are all collectively tree huggers on here. That's how we found ourselves on this committee. It's heartening that the debate over in the environment has been won. You know, it has been won, and it's just about pace of change now, which you know, people have disagreements on it, but it's good to see progress in regard to gas boilers. That is going to be the elephant in the room that has to be dealt with. It's good to see that that's coming with new homes, but we cannot meet our environmental targets without removing all the gas boilers from all the houses in the country. And so, you know, we need to see some change. We need to see some change there. We need to see some progress there as well. But yeah, it's good news. I think we talk about what we don't do in this country a lot, what we don't do well enough, but when it comes to renewable energy, I mean, the figures of electricity generation are unbelievable, and it's something that we should be proud of and keep pushing.
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of energy, with electric cars coming, you know, literally going to be everywhere. Hopefully, in a few years, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it certainly would help. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the topic of energy, I remember when I went to the consultation for the Stratera power station down in East Tilbury, and I believe at that time there was a conflict between a pipeline that they were going to be running and the LTC going in. I don't know whether that's been picked up and whether there is any update on that, but it was just something that I thought I'd mention to councillors and officers, that it was something that we became aware of during the Stratera consultation. And just in reference to the electric vehicle comments with regards to this white paper, just to remind everyone that's listening in as well that electric vehicles still generate PM 2.5, which are very tiny particulate matters from the brake and tyre dust. And what we actually really need to be campaigning on at the moment is to get that into UK law, to get it enshrined into UK law. And that will become part of the environmental bill if we can all campaign enough to our MPs. So I would just please encourage everybody to help spread the word and get that out there, that electric vehicles are not the be-all and end-all solution to the problems we have, and they also will still create a lot of congestion regardless of what they're putting out and what they're running on. and that the electricity has to come from somewhere. So just everyone needs to keep that in mind as well, please, that electric vehicles are not always the solution that people make out. And please campaign to get PM 2.5 enshrined in UK law, because the WHO standards mean that the whole LTC route would fail against that. We know that we've got a professor that's given us that evidence, so we need to campaign and really try and push to get that enshrined into UK law, please.
Thanks, Laura. I don't think there was a question as such, but that's fine. Anyone else with their hands in the room, up in the room?
Councillor Allen was next.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. And well done, Laura, for bringing that up about the PM 2.5. So I did slightly touch on the particulates that come off of tyres, and you've added to that as well as the brake dust as well. I do believe the brake dust is not as dangerous as it used to be, because it used to contain asbestos, and they've changed the composite slightly now, but it's still quite dangerous, I do believe. But in terms of electric vehicles, again, Laura touched on it. You know, they have to be charged, so a power station is there somewhere to charge these vehicles. So there will be a carbon footprint as such somewhere to power these vehicles. You touched on hydrogen. That's something that's been discounted, really. I mean, the inventor, I believe, a gentleman called Stanley Mayer, an American, that invented the hydrogen fuel cell. Now, I understand he drove all around America in his car, running it basically on water. You know, so the emissions that come out the exhaust of that vehicle was just water. So it's probably cleaner in the actual air itself. And I find it, you know, hard to understand why they haven't looked further into hydrogen fuel cell, you know, because that's another alternative. But again, the environmental impacts, when we get that assessment through, I'm sure, Chair, that it's going to be damning. And I mentioned in the last LTC meeting that if it comes back anything other than not damning that report, then it's going to be lies supplied to us, because this is going to have an enormous impact on our borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think that's coming up on the next month's agenda, so not long to wait to go and debate that. Lucy, is it Laura Blake, your hand up?
Yep, Laura Blake and then Councillor Muldowney.
Laura Blake.
Thank you. Just wanted to come back with a couple of comments in response to Councillor Allen's, what Councillor Allen has just said, if I may. Particulate matter 2.5, Councillor Allen, the particulates are small enough to actually get in our bloodstream. So it's not just the respiratory system either. It is small enough to get into our bloodstream. It is extremely dangerous, and it is something that is more and more evidence is coming out on just how dangerous that is. And in response to your comments about damming, obviously we are all extremely concerned on any information that is going to come out on that air quality. The fact is, of whether it's damming and whether or not it meets the policy standards, I think is the big difference here. And as Anna has always told us, the policy in the bar is very low. And that is, again, when you mentioned the article in The Guardian refers to Transport Action Network's legal challenge, which I'm working with Transport Action Network quite closely. They support groups like ourselves who are action groups very much so, and we're in touch with them. And that second legal challenge they have is actually on the national policy statement for the national networks, which is the roads, including RIS2 and the LTC. And that policy was dated in 2014, and that is what they are challenging, and they want to be reviewed and actually updated. So whilst we may consider it damning because common sense says that it's not good to have poor air quality, it's the policies that count in this, and that is why it's important that we support Transport Action Network and that we try and get this reviewed and updated.
Absolutely, Laura. 100% with you on that. If we've got the Transport Secretary himself, you know, Grant Shapps, you know, dismissing guidance and you know, and calling for a review of the environmental impact, it's got to mean something.
Yeah, obviously he didn't take note of what his advisors were telling him, and that is the breaking news that, as you say, broke over the weekend. And Transport Action Network and their legal team are doing some amazing work, and Thames Crossing Action Group support them wholeheartedly and work alongside them as much as we can.
Lovely. It's great the work you're doing. We really appreciate it, Laura, and well done, that man, Grant Shapps. Well done.
Okay, moving over to Councillor Muldowney. Do you wish to speak on this item?
Thank you. Yes, just to say that they're only consulting on prohibiting gas grid connections. There isn't a commitment to prohibiting gas grid connections to new homes from 2025. So just to be clear about that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of Transport Action Network, I spoke to Chris Todd today in terms of bringing Transport Action Network to talk to the task force, which we did discuss before. A March meeting would be good timing for that, because he said that they're waiting to hear back from Grant Shapps. I don't think we should congratulate Grant Shapps too much. He's had to be forced into giving this review, you know, and he's in trouble because he hasn't been paying due attention to what he should have been. So it's not good fellow Grant Shapps at all, quite the opposite. But they have managed to get him to look at the national policy statement. We think they don't know for sure. He's going to be reviewing what he's going to review, but we won't know about that until the end of the month. So it wouldn't be any point. There wouldn't have been any point having them this month, but certainly if we could get them to the March meeting, I think that would be very directly relevant to the Lower Thames crossing, depending on what they're going to review. If it's the national policy statement, then that could have a very direct effect on what the LTC is measured by. If it's not that, then obviously they've got the other legal challenge against the RIS2 project altogether. So I think whichever way that goes, it would be good to get them on the work programme for the March meeting. So I hope that can happen.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we have got a rather busy March agenda already lined up, and the TAN is very early in the process that they're going through at the moment. But I think it's something we definitely got to explore to see if there's a benefit in bringing it to this committee in the future. And I'll be speaking to yourself and other members about taking that further forward.
Okay, the issue is that we've got local elections coming up now, so presumably April and May are going to be cancelled. So the March meeting would be the next possible meeting until probably June. Just to give you a heads up on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll bear that in mind. Any other questions on this item?
There are no other hands raised, Chair.
Okay, moving on to item 6, mitigation and legacy benefits prioritisation. Verbal update from Chris.
Yes, thank you. I think at the last meeting I mentioned that I'd had quite a lot of meetings with LTC about how they're dealing with the 57 items recommended in the Hatch report, and those discussions have continued, and obviously trying for them to try and understand exactly what we're after under each of those has been a little bit of a challenge, so that they're clear what we want. So that's taken up a fair bit of time, but I think it's definitely moving in the right direction. There's a very accommodating attitude. There may well be a few that they cannot do because it's not their responsibility to do, such as things that might be the responsibility for the Department of Transport, for instance. But I expect to be able to come back with a much more detailed report at the March meeting, because I suspect rather than I think it was about 27 items that came up in the last meeting. I think that's going to increase to 30 plus, and then there will be some that they're not sure what to do about, and we'll be looking for the task force members' guidance on those. So it's a positive story, but it's still ongoing because it does take a while to get through these.
Thank you, Chris. Is there any particular examples of any that you said there was a few ones they didn't expect, or they've accepted easier than you thought they would?
I mean, one of the ones that they can't yet accept because it's not their responsibility is we have asked for the toll money, the charges for using the crossing, to be hypothecated. In other words, reserved in part for Thurrock to use for particular projects. Now that decision is a DFT decision. It cannot be made by Highways England or indeed the LTC. So that one is something that LTC can't do, but we need to make overtures towards DFT to see if they're prepared to do it. It's unlikely, it must be said, but it's worth a shot.
Okay, very interesting. Just looking around the room, I think Councillor Muldooney's got a hand, unless anyone was first, Lucy.
It's the only one I can see.
Yeah, just Councillor Muldowney.
Councillor Muldooney.
Chair, thank you, Chris. I'm glad to hear it's going in the same direction. I did ask last month because they said there were 27 items that had been agreed by Highways England from the Hatch report.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked if the task force could receive that list.
Yes, that was, yeah, I know you did. That was the list that they thought had been satisfactorily included. I'm not sure we necessarily agree with them at this point.
Right.
For instance, they may say, well, it's covered by a requirement, a planning condition in the DCO. Well, it may well be, but the approval for that is not ours, as it should be. It might be the Secretary of State. So we still have to work on some of these issues. That's why it hasn't come forward, because the discussions, I mean, we went from 57 to potentially 20 odd that might be included fairly quickly. So it is a positive story, but it just takes a while to get to the end point, which is why I'm hoping to be able to present something to you at the March meeting. Sorry, I can't offer any more than that at this point.
That's okay, I understand. There was also the Executive Director promised us the tree planting figures, but I guess they haven't been. I think that was touched on today by Councillor Spillman anyway. So
yes, well, it was touched on certainly, and Claire kind of verbally indicated, and I'm sure Lucy will capture it in the minutes. They also said that they would write to us. They have given us a draft letter, and we're in the process of discussing it with them, with the hope that it should be issued either this week or most probably next week for the task force, and that will answer quite a lot of the questions that they promised, and a few more that I didn't realise they were going to give us answers to. So
that's good.
It's a useful.
Will that? Can I ask? Will that include the construction mitigation that would be occurring near Chadwell, St Mary, Linford, and East Tilbury?
No, it just they are talking about a further consultation, as I think Matt Palmer mentioned. Probably in the spring, yet to be decided, and they're very keen that construction impacts at a detailed level, at a local level, is a strong part of that consultation. So we will undoubtedly be talking to them about that in the near future.
Okay. And then there were the road schemes to alleviate traffic on the Asda roundabout and other local routes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's. Have we heard anything about that?
Yeah, I think there are positive signs coming. I mean, Tilbury 2 has got to do something, and I don't know exactly what they've got to do, but they have proposed some mitigation on that roundabout. And now the London Resort project has been accepted by the planning inspectorate. They are also planning to do additional mitigation to Asda roundabout, which means that the LTC scheme must account for both of those pieces of mitigation and possibly do more. And I think there is a fair chance that LTC will want to do something in advance of LTC starting or going to examination on that Asda roundabout, because it's so critical to their construction routes.
Yeah.
So there are positive signs coming out of them, and that's all I can say at this point.
Great, thank you. Sorry, just
Right. There's no other hands up.
non-technical summary was
Yes.
going to be published in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
Did that happen?
No, we Anna and I today have agreed the press release text and the covering email text. Now, the covering email text has quotes from the leader, from the portfolio holder, and from the task force chair, all of which have got to be checked off and acceptable to those three people. And then I believe it's going to be issued out by email to everyone on a very long list, which means every councillor, every major stakeholder, and pretty much all of the local stakeholders. And it'll also be published on the website. Now, I'm hoping, well, we wanted it by the end of January, but I'm hoping that will happen this week.
Great.
So
yeah, that would be good.
What's being published is the non-technical summary, and you'll be pleased to know, because it's got the full list of open spaces in it, the full technical report. So
yes,
both of those will be going out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just check? I think there might have been one other thing. Oh, no, that was the other thing.
Okay.
That's it. Thanks very much, Chris, for updating on all of those.
No problem. It was going to come up anyway, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we all look forward to this coming back in March as well. It would be really good to see it, a bit more progress on it. Mr. Robert Quick.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, this is also a follow-up to that last meeting, the promises that were made by Matt Palmer. He said he would have the air quality data to be shared with us. Have we had any information on that air quality data?
No. The minutes actually refer to a promise to share it with officers, because it's officers that understand it, and the information has come to officers, but I don't know whether officers have actually yet got to deal with it in any detail. We're certainly fully aware of how important an issue it is, but I believe we've got all the information in the environmental statement, but we have yet to get through it, because it is 50-odd thousand pages in total, and the bit on air quality will be certainly several hundred.
Okay. The other thing that Matt Palmer said that he would look into was getting an accurate visualisation of the route for residents to see, so they can better understand what they're going to end up with.
Yes. Well, some of that was in today's presentation, but I would imagine, and I've yet to get that confirmed yet, we've still got to talk to them about this next consultation, but it would be necessary to put it into that for sure, so that everyone is aware, because much of the information on the design of structures and buildings, and indeed everything that you heard about today, is not really yet in the public domain. I mean, it is by virtue of the presentations you've had, but it hasn't really been consulted on at the level of detail that it has been presented to you. So it will need to be included in there, and that will be a point we'll be making very strongly to them.
Right, because there was at one stage a talk about them redoing, they did that fly through of the whole route.
Yeah.
Wasn't very useful, but they were at one stage going to update that with the latest design.
Yes, I'm not sure they're going to do that now. I have a feeling it was quite an expensive exercise to do it, and I can't see them doing it again. I could be wrong, but that's how I read it.
All right, but if they're going to have another consultation with residents, and it's going to be something like that, they're going to be looking.
Yeah, certainly visualizations, you're absolutely right. They need to be part of it, and we'll be making that point. But I don't know whether we can insist on an updated fly-through.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the visuals that we've seen from the last tonight and the previous meeting are far and beyond what Highways England have ever shared before. And
Yep.
I completely agree with Mr. Quick that is what's going to give residents a real sense of the size of this project and how it's actually going to look around their villages and open spaces. So, yeah, I welcome any more visuals from Highways England. Laura's got a hand up.
If we can make sure that is a clear feature in the minutes, that gives us a lot more ammunition to use. So thank you.
Yeah, I can do that in the minutes.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, it's kind of an any other business kind of topic, really, I suppose. But if I may, this is obviously the first task force meeting after the news has broken that Anna Eastgate's going to be leaving the council. I'd just like to take another opportunity to publicly thank Anna for all her hard work that her and the team, but obviously her more so at the moment with the news that she's leaving. It's been completely invaluable to us as an action group, and I've learned so much from her that has helped me in my position. So a big thank you for that. And I just wondered, as a task force moving forward, and this was with all respect to Chris and the team and all the officers and everyone that are remaining with us, obviously, but that what we can do as a task force, if and what we can do regarding, is Anna going to be replaced and what will happen next? Because obviously it will leave a huge gap with all the hard work that she's done and the knowledge and experience that she brought to us, to the local authority and to us as an action group and being part of this task force. So I just wondered if and what we can do as a task force moving forward to just help that along and make sure that nothing is lost from the hard work that she has put in over the years with us, please.
I can't offer any comment at all, afraid. I don't know anything about that. I mean, I'm happy to carry on and support on all the professional technical stuff, but there's a lot of other things that Anna does.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know she does a lot of other things outside of LTC as well and other things from that, but I just think that it is important that as a task force that we acknowledge the work that Anna has done and that we ensure that as a group we're able to keep up with the standard, the high standard that she has set for whoever hopefully steps in to take over from her moving forward.
Completely agree.
Really, thank you.
You agree? Another item for the minutes, probably.
Thank you.
I'll make sure it's minuted.
Councillor Massey, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think it's really good to note that on the minutes, the work that Anna has put in, and our thanks as a task force. I think the majority of the members have always found some benefit of working alongside Anna on this task force, and yeah, thank you very much for everything she's done. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to echo that really, do we know when Anna will actually be going? Will we see her again at a task force meeting? Will she be here in March? Or is that it now? Does anybody know?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know at the moment either, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yeah, just to echo, you know, thanks to Anna for all the hard work that she's done, but also to Chris and the team. And yeah, also if we could get confirmed, will we be presumably we won't be now having task force meetings in April and May. The normal excuse is it's because of PERDA.
The work plan says that there is a meeting on the 19th of April.
Okay.
So, but nothing beyond that.
Right. Okay.
There is a meeting scheduled for April. There's not a meeting in May, obviously, because of the elections. So the first meeting in the municipal year will be June. I don't know the exact dates yet, but as soon as I know them, I'll send them through to everyone.
That's great. I mean, if we are going to have a meeting in April, I'd certainly really welcome that, because quite often it's cancelled because of PERDA, although I think we were going to have a review of PERDA and whether it was really necessary to cancel all meetings during the election cycle. Certainly, I think with the LTC being where it is at the moment, and we, you know, they were trying to aim for their DCO at the end of spring, so it would be really good to have a meeting in April if at all possible, I think.
It is on the work programme at the moment, so yes, as long as it's on the work programme when things come around, then we can see where that goes. Laura Blake.
It was just to jump in really and say that I remember that previously on the April one, I think an agreement was come to because of it being close to PERDA or borderline, that members all agreed because of the importance of LTC that they would stick strictly to no political comments to actually byline that. So hopefully we can come to that agreement again this time round.
I would support that. Lucy, say who's got their hands up, please.
It's just Councillor Rice.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, regarding the meeting in April, yeah, that should go ahead because it's very important. I know, for instance, we've got a planning meeting and I know there's a licensing meeting as well. So life has to carry on even though there are elections going on, but we just have to take the politics out of it. But that shouldn't be a problem.
I completely agree. I don't think this should be about politics, and we've got so much, some very busy things coming up to do with the LTC, because behind the scenes, obviously, Highways England are still looking to submit a DCO at some point. So I think having as many available time slots on the calendars as possible. Any other questions, Lucy?
No, no other hands raised.
No. Okay, moving on then to the final item agenda, item 7, the work programme. The work programme is included on pages 21 to 24 of the agenda. Does any member have any further items they would like added? Any hands raised at all, Lucy?
No, no hands raised, Chair.
Chair, just to say the items on the agenda for EIA, HIA and CO2 emissions. The CO2 emissions thing is from Councillor Downey back in December, and so something will be prepared for that, short paper. The EIA and HIA won't be a conclusion, it'll be a progress report, but it will be in written form.
Thank you, Chris. And if there's no hands, oh, sorry.
Sorry, and obviously the economic mitigation list, hopefully something in more detail on that too. And yes, that should provide quite a full meeting, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. And if you could circulate the responses from Highways England in the meantime, that'd be fantastic.
Yes.
So with that, this concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 20:34 p.m. Thank you very much for all your time and questions and debate. It's much appreciated. Stay safe and see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you, Chair. Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone.